tongue, it's not chewed enough. It needs to be really broken down.
Interesting. That's a good. Yeah, it's a good way to drive it home. I think that last little bit. So if we're not sitting down and focused on eating, and then we maybe don't chew enough or let the saliva do the work. I mean, are these distractions indirectly what's causing our digestive problems because we're not chewing enough, and then it leads to the stomach having to work in overdrive all the time?
Yeah. So a lot of, I'm not going to say it's like the sole cause, right? But it can be a big help for people who are experiencing digestive issues, whether it's reflux or burping after they eat, or bloating after they eat, or an excess fullness after they eat, or even people who are experiencing digestive systems kind of further down the line. So more gas later on after eating, more bloating lower down after eating, or things like constipation or diarrhea. Those are kind of further down the north to south process, but everything you do at the top of the process in the northern part affects the stuff that's going on in the southern part.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you're not slowing down, you're not producing enzymes, you're not producing enough stomach acid, because stress shuts down stomach acid production, stress shuts down digestive enzyme production. Like I said, if that gas is on, you can't put the brake on and expect both to work. So
right.
You're not producing enough enzymes, you're not producing enough stomach acid, that food is not being broken down well enough in your stomach to trigger the next steps of the process, which is more enzyme release, bile release, more nutrient absorption through the small intestine. And when those steps in the process aren't triggered appropriately, you can kind of get other symptoms like reflux if your food is pushed back because it's not ready to be let in to the next step of the process, so you can get reflux.
Yeah. Okay.
If your food is not digested properly and it moves through your digestive system, your small intestine can develop bacterial overgrowth in that area where we don't normally have a lot of bacteria, because there's food particles in that area that the bacteria like to feed on. So they kind of migrate up, and then that can create issues with gas and bloating and food intolerances and all kinds of things.
So we're really seeing a big domino effect here
Yes.
is essentially what you're describing. And so essentially what you're describing here as well is, so you got, the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest, right? Mm-hmm. And then you got the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight. And so when that fight or flight is active, it's suppressing everything that the rest and digest part, the parasympathetic nervous system, does. And that includes digestion. That's one of those big things, because I think physiologically, when you have that fight or flight response, the blood, a lot of the blood goes away from those vital organs
Yes.
or those digestive organs and goes towards the big muscles,
Yes.
so you can fight or flee or
Yes.
whatever you need to do. So that's when we're on our phone. That's when we're thinking about the work project or whatever.
I think that's sometimes the hardest thing it's hard for me to stomach, even knowing this as I know it. Like, understanding that those things are our stressors. Those things are the things that activate our sympathetic nervous system, our fight or flight. Our phones do that. The light from our phones do that. The light from our computer screens and our TVs and our overhead lights, they activate that part of our nervous system. The deadlines that you're trying to meet at work, the fact that you got to go pick up your kids here, there, and everywhere, and they got to get to soccer, and they got to get to band, and they got to get here, and then you got to get home and make dinner, and then you got to do this, and you got to meet that. That is all activating our fight or flight nervous system. It is very difficult to live in our society now as it is without that being activated. It takes conscious effort to get into that parasympathetic state, to get into that rest and digest state. And I think all of us can benefit from actively trying to get into that state.
Yeah. So we're seeing, so this is, this sounds so much like you said, like everybody in our society right now, especially people that are parents and they have careers, and there's a lot of different balls in the air. We're trying to juggle all these different responsibilities we have. And so the stress and not turning off that stress just can lead to a host of problems with your digestion and other aspects of your health, as we know.
Yeah.
And so this is actually kind of a pretty good segue into, a little while ago, I had an episode where we talked about with a group of ladies called Swole Sisters Worldwide, and we talked about intuitive eating, and we did talk a lot about the stressors in particular with women as far as just I don't know, all the stressors that they have and what that can cause. So we're kind of getting into this a little bit, and so we talked about weight, and we talked about how solely focusing on weight is really detrimental because it's now that's one more stressor added onto the pile. That really gets into people's head. And so, like, what sort of approach do you take with people as far as weight goes in your practice?
I have a lot of women who come to me with weight loss being a concern, and or wanting to change how they look or feel in their bodies as a concern, which is a valid concern. I understand not feeling comfortable in your body. I've lived that. I understand it. So validating that that's something that is important to them is important to me. But I'll give you an example of a client who came to me recently, and the discussion we had was her biggest concern that she wrote down on her paperwork was, I need to lose weight, I'm overweight. And then she filled out the assessment questionnaire, and I see all of the symptoms that she's experiencing digestively and energy-wise and blood sugar, and all of those things are showing up to me as things that are out of balance for her in her body. And the question I asked her was, when she saw all of that, when she saw the picture that I kind of presented to her, would losing weight, would it matter if you didn't lose the weight if all of these things changed and you felt better? And her answer was, you know what? I don't think I would care about losing the weight if I felt better. And that was, I think, to her a big aha moment of like, oh, I'm hyper focusing on this method of changing my body when really what I can set out to do is kind of rebalance my body in a way that weight loss may be a side effect of that. I don't guarantee that for anybody.
Yeah, and perhaps. Yep.
Right. If that's a side effect that and it's something that you wanted, then fine. That's great. But it's certainly not something that I set out like guaranteeing for my clients at all. Our goal when we work together is to rebalance those foundational systems and make you feel better, and hopefully get rid of those annoying symptoms. So.
And hopefully get rid of some of that stress that's happening, at least, bring those levels down. I mean, of course, some stress is probably a good thing, but
there's a balance.
Yeah, certainly in our society, it's an issue. Yeah. And so another little subject we talked about beforehand was about BMI. And I know, BMI, I've always, kind of known that it is a bit of a flawed system, but because it doesn't take into account things like body composition, right? So, and you were mentioning earlier that where BMI originated from, and could you just explain that again for the listeners, because it was a big eye opener for me because I had no clue how it had actually come about.
Yeah, I will say I actually. I'm not gonna I don't have my sources to quote on this, so this is coming from my memory, but from what I have learned, BMI is actually, it's so interesting. It was actually initially, I believe, something that was developed by an astronomer because he wanted to try to understand the perfect form, I believe it was the perfect male form. And then that got co-opted by actuaries for life insurance companies who were trying to assess risk for giving someone a life insurance policy. So they wanted to assess the risk based on how much this person weighs versus how tall they are. So they used this idea from this astronomer to create BMI scale. And then that got moved into the medical industry because the doctors are doing the exams for the life insurance companies, right? So they start using this chart, this BMI chart, and then it gets turned into this whole, it's kind of like over time it just becomes this thing that we use. And when we really look at the origins of it, what was the actual purpose of it? The actual purpose of it was not to assess the health of an individual. It was to kind of give an idea of the relative risk for a group of people for life insurance policies. So we're using that as something to gauge whether someone is healthy or not. And like working in the fitness field, that, someone who has a higher weight because they have a higher amount of muscle and a shorter stature, they're going to be listed on the BMI chart as overweight or obese. Like, it's not to me, it's not an accurate method of assessing someone's health.
Right.
I don't rely on it.
Yeah.
I understand why it's used in the medical system, and I get it. But I agree with the Swole Sisters. Like
the Swole Sisters. Shout out
did I say
to
that right?
Jen and Justine. Yes. Swole as in jacked.
Yes. By the way, I loved their episode, and I want to be their friend because we think very similarly.
Well, maybe we'll link up and have like a chaotic episode with everybody, huh?
Sorry, I forgot what I was saying.
That's okay.
I got distracted by the idea of
by the Swole Sisters.
By other people thinking similarly. Because sometimes I'm very, like, in my own world. I work by myself doing my own thing, and I'm like, do other people think the way I think? And
now she's around people. Oh my God. So overstimulated just being around one other person right now in this episode.
True. Very true.
So yeah, with BMI, we see that it's really just taking body weight into account, and I think this is a good point, I guess, because now we're talking. This is the second episode where we've really talked about how little weight has on your health, and it's so, like you said, hyper focused on. But now we look at something like BMI, and then also the weight on the scale, the number on the scale, and you can have the same person step on the scale and weigh a certain amount, and then a year later step on the scale after transforming their body, and you might see them gain or lose a pound or stay the same weight, but they look completely different. Their clothes fit completely different. Their blood work looks different. They have more energy and so forth. And meanwhile, that number on the scale has not shifted whatsoever.
Right. Yeah, exactly like I said before. Like, if all of these other things changed and you felt better and you had more energy and you were sleeping better and your digestive symptoms were gone, but the weight didn't change,
right?
Do you think it's going to matter that the weight didn't change? Maybe not.
Probably not. Yeah. So you see, like, I've seen actual pictures of it before, and somebody can look way different, and the scale doesn't show a darn thing, but maybe you take circumference measurements, or, maybe you use calipers, I don't know, but you look totally different, your clothes fit differently as well. So, weight isn't telling the whole story, but then also, I think we're talking overall about people that want to look differently, and it's like, do you necessarily have to have that be your main goal? I think there's probably still going to be some listeners that still do. They still want that to be their main goal, but like we're talking about maybe if we turn it into one of the goals or a side effect, and we focus on some of these other things, we take some of that stress away that might be holding the weight on, perhaps, and then we focus on these other things, and that kind of comes along with it, but we kind of let go of those stressors. Yeah.
I think we have a long way to go in terms of not using weight as a marker, not using weight as a goal.
Right.
Because it's just so ingrained in us as people that, that's a marker. We, especially as women, like we're taught to eat less and move more and shrink and be small and be thin and be pretty. And I could go on a tangent here, and I'll just,
That's okay.
I'll sum it up to say that as a practitioner, I do not focus on weight. I focus on how my client feels. I focus on their symptoms and the story they're telling, and how we can use that to get them feeling better and moving towards better health, whether it's, managing an autoimmune condition or, healing supporting their digestive system or anything like that.
Now, I'm sure you probably come across this frequently, and that is the concept of for lack of a better term, fad diets. I'm sure you see some people come in that maybe are on one, but they come to work with you for some extra help or something like that. What is the process like when you have somebody that maybe is working with these fad diets and maybe it's